The Indiana Pacers just had one of the greatest and most unlikely playoff runs in NBA history. From the unbelievable comebacks and game winners to the iconic moments, that Pacers run will be remembered for a very long time. They became a massive underdog story and were doing all the things barely anybody expected them to do. And not only that, they were also doing it as a team. The Pacers were making people rethink what a championship team even looks like. Miles Turner wasn't kidding when he said they were playing with the power of friendship. That's real. When you have a team where everyone views each other as equally important and they're all chasing the same goal, anything feels possible. But I call it one of the most unlikely playoff runs for a reason. During the preseason, they were plus 6,600 to win the championship, meaning if you bet $100, you would win 6,600 back. The next highest teams that did end up winning it were the 2015 Warriors when everyone thought you couldn't win a ring shooting threes, and the 2011 Dallas Mavericks who were also coached by Rick Carlisle. Also, the Pacers played 23 total games in the playoffs and were favored in just 6 of them. They were going against all odds from the very beginning. They had their first 50-win season since 2014, their first finals appearance since 2000, and took OKC to 7 games in the finals. And as much as people hate them, that OKC team had a borderline historic season. Not to mention, going into the playoffs, their star player was voted the most overrated in the entire league by other guys in the NBA. And Tyrese and the Pacers didn't just prove everybody wrong, they did it over and over again. People said that they only beat the Bucks because they were hurt, and that there was no way that they would beat the 64-win Cavs. And despite them also having some injuries, they still beat them pretty handedly and upset one of the top championship contenders. Then they said they won't be able to beat the Knicks like they did the year before, and yet they did. And once they made it to the finals, people said that there's absolutely no way they beat the Thunder. And although the Pacers didn't win, they did force them to 7 games in the biggest stage possible. I know not winning it all sucks, especially with Tyrese getting hurt, but it was still a beyond successful season and something that was truly special. Like, half the team became household names throughout their run, and almost everybody was rooting for the Pacers. And that very first series against the Bucks showed why. After a successful regular season, the Pacers were the 4th seed entering the playoffs and were facing the Bucks in the very first round, which is a huge test right away. However, they were able to win the first 2 games in convincing fashion before losing Game 3 due to a Gary Trent masterclass. They would bounce right back with a big win, but that was also the same night that Damian Lillard tore his Achilles, so it was kinda bittersweet. And up 3-1 with a chance to close the series out, they were able to come back and win even though the game looked all but over. Not only did they have an insane comeback to send it into overtime, but they did it again in overtime to win the game. They were down 7 with only 40 seconds left. However, after some clutch buckets from the Pacers and very unclutch moments from the Bucks, it came down to one last shot. Tyrese drove down the lane on Giannis out of all people and made the layup to win the game. Just a huge moment in general, and such an awesome way to win a series. For the Pacers, that is. For the Bucks, that's absolutely devastating, especially after what happened to Dame. And of course, this led to the whole thing with Tyrese Haliburton's dad that would get him suspended from being at the games. Which, as dumb as it was looking back at it, it made this playoff run even more iconic than it already was. Then in the second round, they were taking on the 64-win Cavaliers, who everyone already had making the conference finals before the playoffs even started. But obviously things would not go how people thought. The Pacers were able to win the first game on the road, which was huge, and it created an absolute must-win scenario for both teams. And in that second game, the Cavs had a 14-point lead in the 4th quarter, but the Pacers were able to quickly cut it down when the game mattered the most. After multiple big-time plays, it yet again came down to Tyrese Haliburton. And on top of grabbing his own rebound from his missed free throw, he also dribbles it out and takes the 3 to win it. Another unbelievable comeback capped off with a game winner from Tyrese Haliburton. The Cavs were able to bounce back in Game 3 just like the Bucks, but the Pacers would then respond again in Game 4 by holding the Cavs to just 41 points at halftime. And up 3-1, they were able to close out the series in only 5 games. The Cavs did deal with some injuries themselves, but they were still a 64-win team and looked completely outmatched at times. That takes us to the conference finals, where they would face off against the Knicks, who they eliminated the year before. Game 1 was probably one of the craziest basketball games I've ever watched. In Madison Square Garden, the Knicks had a 17-point lead halfway through the 4th quarter, which was their biggest lead in the entire game. And after seeing all the comebacks the Pacers have had already, this time everybody was still watching. This is when Aaron Naismith single-handedly decided they weren't losing that game. He would go on to hit what felt like 10 threes in a row, all while the Pacers were able to get defensive stops on the other end. And of course, it all came down to Tyrese Haliburton again. And with time winding down, he somehow makes his way to the three-point line and hits the game-winning three. Without any hesitation, Tyrese immediately starts doing the choke celebration, and everyone watching was losing their minds. Except his foot was on the line and that game was going into overtime. Thankfully for them though, they were able to close it out. It was an absolutely iconic win, and yet another game that made their run that much more special. It became a pretty big theme. Whenever the game gets close, the Pacers play better, and it doesn't matter how many points you're up by, no lead is safe. Aaron Naismith would actually become the first player in playoff history to score 20 points in a 5-minute span in the second half, and the first player to hit 6 threes in a fourth quarter. That performance set the tone for the rest of the series. The Knicks would go on to pick up 2 wins, but the Pacers would close it out in Game 6 on their home floor. It was by far one of the most entertaining series in the entire playoffs. Both teams gave it everything they had. However, the Pacers were heading to the finals for the first time in 25 years. Which leads us to Game 1 of the NBA Finals, aka the Oklahoma City Blunder. OKC was winning basically all game and had a 15-point lead with just under 10 minutes left to go. But then the Pacers started to do what they always do and close the gap in the final minutes. Everyone on the Pacers got in on this one. 7 different players had at least 3 points in the fourth quarter compared to just 3 for OKC. And somehow, like every other comeback they've had throughout their run, it all came down to Tyrese Haliburton. And per usual, he hit another game winner. Tyrese had more playoff game winners and iconic moments in a single playoff run than most players have in their entire career. The Pacers were literally being accused of black magic the way they were pulling off the impossible on a consistent basis. The fact that the Pacers were able to pull off 4 different historic comebacks in a single playoff run doesn't even make any sense. The rest of the series would be a back and forth battle, and if it wasn't for Tyrese suffering a torn Achilles, then who knows how it could have finished. It was still really cool to see 2 smaller market teams face off in the finals, and both teams had so many memorable moments. Again, it is rare that you see the team that lost in the finals being talked about so highly. And Rick Carlisle was honestly the perfect coach to lead them. If you somehow didn't know already, Rick was also the head coach of the 2011 Dallas Mavericks, who won one of the most improbable championships of all time. A playoff run like the Pacers had is exactly what he does best. And they also had the right roster. Tyrese is one of the best floor generals in the entire NBA. Pascal Siakam is a great two-way forward that impacts winning in so many different ways. Benedict Mathurin had some big games for a 22-year-old. Aaron Naismith had one of the best shooting playoff runs ever. Andrew Nembhard is a top playoff riser in the league. TJ McConnell had multiple big moments and even took over some quarters in the finals. Obi Toppin was always there for a clutch dunk or putback out of nowhere. And Miles Turner, aka the most tenured Pacer out of all of them, had several moments throughout the run as well. It was literally the perfect storm. A bunch of unselfish players all coming together to try to win a ring while everyone else was underestimating them. And I would expect other organizations to take inspiration from them. The new CBA is less about multiple superstar players and more about depth and role players. The stars will win you games in the playoffs, but when they don't, that's when your role players can step up and put your team over the top. And that's exactly what Naismith, Nembhard, McConnell, and all those guys did. They stepped up to make plays and knock down the difficult shot when it was needed most. We'll see what their plan is next year without Tyrese, but what they were able to accomplish in that single playoff run will always be special. But let me know what you thought about the Pacers run in the comments, and please leave a like to support the channel. Also, subscribe if you're new for more basketball videos just like this one.